I'm Leanne and welcome back to the channel where we make things just because. Today I'm going to be making a custom card box for the card game Gwent from The Witcher 3 for my amazing partner for Father's Day. So let me show you how I did it. So here is the box I'm going to modify. It was once one of those retro sweet gift set things, but as a hoarder I've kept the box for a very long time waiting for a use for it. I started by removing all of the original hardware from the box. I'm going to be replacing it with something more in keeping with the final design, and this silver colour is far too modern and so it had to go. Once I had removed the hardware from the box, I had to fill the holes that were left behind. I just used some of this wood filler in a similar colour to the box, but as you can see it's very orange. However, as the new hardware is slightly differently shaped, most of these holes would be covered anyway. Side note, do you remember these little plastic spatulas you got from school? Turns out they are so useful for so many things. Once all the holes were filled, I set the pieces aside to dry and moved on to the interior of the box. So I started by removing the dividers and measuring them to work out the height of the inserts that I would need. Once I knew this height, I measured it out onto some craft foam and cut them out into strips. Then I worked out how long each piece needed to be by measuring them against the box. I then cut out many of these strips, and as it turned out later, I didn't even need to. Then I started adding them to the box and measuring them against the cards to ensure that they would be the right fit, trying to leave a little bit of room so that I could cover them with something decorative later. I then decided that having all these tiny pieces of foam to wedge together was just too much, so I switched to using floor mat foam as this was much thicker and the process went much faster. So I finally got all of the insert pieces I needed. With all that finished, I moved back to the top of the box. I had made this rough sketch of what I wanted the front of the box to look like, with the magical signs on a slightly raised section in the centre. To make this happen, I passed my sketch over to my wizard friend Lawrence, and he used his mind-boggling computer skills to make this 3D render of what I wanted. This meant that instead of having to try and cut all these out by hand, I could use his CNC machine. All I had to do was load up the balsa wood sheets I was using, set the machine to the right position, and set it to cut. And here we have a perfectly cut piece. With all that excitement out of the way, it was back to the box and time for sanding. I sanded down all the areas that I had filled earlier. This required a lot of sanding because the wood filler was so orange and I knew that the stain wouldn't cover it, so I sanded right down until all the orange was gone. Now it was time to stain. I had already decided that I was going to stain the outside of the box this dark oak colour. The colour looks quite dark in the tin, but I'd used this before and knew that the colour was actually quite warm and bright. Putting this stain on was super easy. I just dipped a cloth into the stain and then rubbed it onto the box, trying to stick with the grain of the wood as much as possible. I also wiped away all the excess as I went. I stained all of the outside of the box as well as the inside, as much as you'd be able to see anyway, to ensure that it would be fully covered. I even stained the little dividers on the inside of the box. Once the box was stained and dry, I moved back to the interior of the box to finish the inserts that I'd started earlier. I wanted to cover them with this green velvet material. Doing this was pretty simple. I took each of the pieces that I'd made for the inserts and covered them individually in the green velvet using hot glue to secure it. To make sure that they looked seamless once they were in place, I glued down the bottom edge first, then the sides, followed by the top. I also cut away the corner pieces to ensure that they would not be too bulky. I also cut out some long strips of leather about 2 centimetres wide for later. I then took each of my covered pieces and slipped them into their right positions. On one of the short edges I added the leather strip. I needed to do this because I'd made the insert so snug that I couldn't get the cards out, but this allowed me just to pop them out without any hassle. Back to the top of the box, I had decided that I wanted to try and add some lights. So I needed to cut out some holes to allow the light through. As you can see, I made a little bit of a mess of this at first, but it was fine because we can cover that up later and no one but me and you will ever know about it. So I worked out where the holes needed to go, lining them up with the front piece, and then used this large hole cutting piece with my drill. Once I had drilled all the holes, I needed to make the cover for the inside of the box that would house all the electronics and lights. I made some spaces with this square wooden dowel and then worked out how long the inner panel needed to be and cut that to size. This panel is made of the same wood used for the top piece on the CNC machine. As you can see, it can be cut with a Stanley knife or an X-Acto knife, but it does take a while to get through. But as Adam Savage says, it is better to do many softer passes and get a better finish than to try and cut through it in one go and end up ruining it. Adam also says that you should never cut with a dull blade, but hey, you can't follow all the advice on the internet, right? So this probably took way longer than it needed to. Next, I stained the dowel pieces to match the rest of the box and then wood glued them into place, clamping them and leaving them to dry. Finally, it was time to get started on the cool lights. I began by working out where the lights needed to go on my panel and hot gluing them into place. The hot glue is really the easiest way to attach them, and by securing them into place now, it means that I just need one less set of hands when I'm soldering later. Once I had all my lights in place, I could begin wiring them together. I started by attaching the positive and negative legs of each two sets of lights. This meant that I only needed to wire together 5 sets of lights instead of 10 individual lights. I mean, I could have just used 5, but I had 10, so I did 10. Once I had all of the correct legs soldered together, I then began wiring the lights together. Each positive leg had to be wired to the next positive leg, and each negative leg had to be wired to the next negative leg, and so on and so forth. This gave me a bit of a headache trying to remember which ones were which, but knowing that the long leg was a positive and the short leg was a negative really helped here. I eventually got all of the wires into the right places and it was time for the battery box. I just glued this into place with some high strength glue. Then I did a quick test to make sure everything was working. And it was working! Don't worry about the lights flickering. They're supposed to flicker. They're flickering lights. To finish off the lights, I wanted each of the magical signs on the front of the box to glow in their appropriate colour. To do this, I cut out pieces from these document folders in the colours I wanted and simply hot glued them into the lid of the box. It was blue for Ard, green for Axie, purple for Erden, yellow for Quen, and red for Igni. Some of the colours needed multiple layers of plastic to get to the colour I wanted. With the lights done, I had one last decision to make. I wasn't sure whether to make the centrepiece of the box the same colour as the box or contrasting. So I stained up 2 pieces and tried them out. I wasn't happy with either of the colours, so I actually ended up deciding on the darker of the 2, and then I put a second layer of the lighter colour over the top to warm it up a bit. This ended up working really well and I was really happy with the final colour. Now it's time for final assembly. I glued the front plate onto the box with wood glue. This was a little scary because if I messed it up, it wasn't coming off again, but it was all fine. And here we see that little plastic spatula coming in handy again. I made sure to be extra careful to make sure that the holes in the box lined up with the symbols on the front so that the light could come all the way through evenly. Finally, the last thing to do was to replace all the hardware. I picked out this set of hinges, closers and little corner pieces that I thought looked really cool. I started with the corners, which were just simply nailed into place. The nails, however, were really tiny, so I just used a little pair of nips to hold onto them. So, you know, I didn't have to hammer my fingers. Once these were all in place, I fitted the latches and the hinges. To do this, I lined them up with the original site of the hardware and screwed them into place. To make sure the hinges were in the right place, I made sure that the centre line of the hinge was lined up with the line between the 2 boxes. With the latch on the front, I fitted the top piece of the latch first and then connected the bottom piece to it before screwing that into place as well. Then I added the finishing touch of this beautiful Witcher medallion in the centre. This is simply pressure fit into the centre as I'd made the hole the exact right size. This meant that we could pop it out later and put it back in the cosplay it was stolen from, should we ever want to wear that again. With it all finished, let me show you how it looks. So there we have it, guys. That's the box all finished and I am really pleased with it, and my partner really likes it too. I learned a lot of new things doing this project, from the wiring for the lights to using the CNC machine. So for me this was an amazing project and I can't wait to do more like it. I really hope you guys enjoyed it too. Goodbye.